Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. At the Brussels EU summit, European leaders spent 12 hours navigating crises from Ukraine to Iran, while simultaneously debating Europe's carbon market and soaring energy prices. Now, Hungary blocked a $90 billion support package for Kyiv. However, the topic of energy was also a mainstay of discussion, in particular on the EU's emissions trading system reform, the release of CO2 allowances, and measures to ease electricity costs. Now, all this highlights the tension between immediate relief and long-term climate goals. Now, we explore the implications of all this with Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, political scientist from the University of Warsaw. Good to have you back on TVP World.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Renata, I want to just get a very brief, quick 2 or 3 point takeaways from that EU Council summit that ended on Thursday. What are the main things that you got out of it before we dig more into the energy topic?
Okay, first and foremost, there is no deal about the loan for Ukraine. And this is, I'm afraid, due to Viktor Orban's constant veto, constant since December. So he's very stubborn in refusing to accept this deal. That would be point number one. A second point is that the question which was supposed to be actually dealt with during the summit, which is European Union's competitiveness, had to be postponed for later, but we do not know for when actually. And this also means that there are so many up-to-date or more up-to-date questions than competitiveness, that it may harm actually this question, and we will have to come back to it whether we want it or not, because it's one of the crucial aspects of the EU's future globally. And the third thing is that ETS was a very important topic, but the EU is not going to really revolutionize, let's say, the question of a perspective towards ETS. Rather, it will opt for mitigating the negative influence of the war in Iran. And it will try to search for measures like electricity tax cuts and lower grid fees, any kind of state support. So I would say these were three main topics, and one loser, as you know, which is the European Union's competitiveness question, which was very important for Germany. But it also might mean that Germany are not as strong now as a country, is not as strong as a country as we might, as well, many Polish, let's say, right side of the political scene commentators think or try to state.
Okay, so I mean, competitiveness, that is also very much connected to energy. Let's talk about that for a minute. There was that letter before the council meeting got together with 10 countries, including Poland, that were very much against, or rather wanted reform to, as you mentioned earlier, the ETS, this emission trading system. Now, based on that, you had countries like Italy, Austria in there. So with what we heard from yesterday, you said that was this more of a temporary victory? Who won with this ETS adjustments? Because they're supposed to be coming around the summertime, but who won yesterday with all this?
Well, it's very difficult to say who won. I mean, because, you know, we might say, okay, Poland wants a reform of the ETS system, and we want, obviously, to pay as little as possible for the energy. On the other hand, ETS is very beneficial for our state budget, and it was supposed to somehow push all those countries that had to reform their, in particular, of course, energy mix towards less and less coal and more renewable energy resources, which Poland hasn't done yet, and it hasn't invested properly into that. So now, whether we legitimize this tough situation in which we just simply haven't used the money from Brussels from the EU, the money, it's our money, to reform our coal mines. Well, that's our problem, actually. And now reforming it will just prolong probably the difficult situation in that sector. So here I wouldn't say that we lost or won. I would say that the EU should be probably a little bit more determined to really well design this reform of the ETS, so that on the one hand it still keeps promoting renewable energy resources and our independence of any kind of gas or oil from the outside. On the other hand, of course, we have to be aware of the broader consequences of maintaining this system where the countries do not actually invest properly in the reforms, because this will definitely raise the prices. And for households, it may be tough. And this can also give fuel to Eurosceptics and populists. So here we have to be very careful about stating who's the winner, who's the loser. Anyway, those who really wanted a revolution in ETS, they didn't get what they wanted. Those who wanted just a tiny reform, they might be satisfied. I think in the end, Poland might be considered kind of a winner, in a sense that there will be a reform, and the EU also concerns quite seriously the prices of energy in the European Union, which is a good news. But the bad news is that the countries, the EU member states, will obviously try to use it again, particularly for their own political interest, which is, in my opinion, a little bit, disappointing, but this may be the case. ETS will be again politically misused.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think when pointing out, like, emissions allowances, just for Poland, I think they contribute about 25%, a quarter of electricity costs. So that, as you already mentioned, that's going to be very much impactful here in Poland. But
yes, it's a problem. But on the other hand, we get a lot of money to the budget. If the state budget for all these years of operating this ETS system, if we had invested into actual reform of this coal mining sector and this sector that really emits a lot of carbon dioxide, we might have now a way different situation. We might be independent, we might be restructured and, safe, by the way. So this European Union's instrument in Poland could help a lot in lowering the energy prices because, for example, those people who are now employed in a coal mining sector, they could be, or the sector that really emits the most carbon dioxide, they could be employed in military-related sector or those W's companies, and that could be a part of this restructuralization, which would bring a lot of benefits. But this is, as you know, a bit tough topic for SAFE. But since the money will come anyway, it can be a chance also to shift a little bit those problems that are now in this coal mining sector from being tragic and terrible to being sort of solvable, at least partly.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you talked about restructuring, and at the same time, it's something sort of in the distance. I mean, the EU has very much put a lot of effort on restructuring its energy mix, on renewables, on this whole system, which is now being put to the test. How much, if, let's say, this conflict in Iran continues, the energy prices continue to rise, how much does that, let's say, long-term impact the policy? Does the Green Deal now get chopped away? How much is that going to change if all these, let's say, pressures continue?
Well, that's a very good question. It all depends on how long the crisis, so the war in Iran will last, and we don't know that. It's all dependent on the United States. So if in Poland anyone has the idea of blaming anyone for what has been going on with energy prices, I mean, it's Donald Trump to be blamed and not Donald Tusk or not the European Union. But of course, the EU has to undertake measures, and it seems that yesterday during the summit, these ideas that appeared were quite sober. So, of course, the European Commission first prepared them and evaluated them somewhat so that, they are doable, like tax cuts, as I said, or, for example, state support put forward as possible short-term fixes. So it could be measures that could help, at least for now. But the question is, for how long? And then what, right? Because, of course, the EU can be flexible in these areas, but these are not reforms. It's just, ad hoc measures that can help. I know from the experience, because I have analyzed it many times, that each time the EU faces a huge crisis that may be really damaging for the whole EU, it usually comes up with a solution that is then really accepted by the citizens, and also quite sober, if I may use this kind of phrase. And I hope this time it will also be the case. A lot depends on the member states, of course. It's really dependent mainly on the US. So here the big question is also whether the EU has the idea of how to position itself vis-a-vis what has been going on recently in Iran and this whole this whole war.
Yeah, and Iran is something that will continue. I know we're looking at prices today, but I think that's something we'll have to keep on looking at how that develops. Look, thanks so much for that insightful interview about energy in particular. That was Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.